Welcome. My name is Steve Stein. I'm the founder of BetterListen and Wisdom Feed, and we are excited to host this kind of introductory event tonight. Everyday Emerson, How Stoic Insights Can Change Your Life with Mark Matousek. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us for this evening's session. We're going to be talking about four essential wisdom lessons from Ralph Waldo Emerson that can help us in dealing with the craziness, the stress, the dysfunction that we see in the news every day. But before we get into those four principles, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about who Ralph Waldo Emerson was and why his philosophy is so useful to us. Ralph Waldo Emerson was born in 1803 and died in 1887. His middle name was Waldo, and that's what he liked to be called, Waldo Emerson. He was an American essayist, lecturer, philosopher, minister, abolitionist, and poet who led the Transcendentalist movement in the mid 19th century. He was seen as a champion of individualism and critical thinking, as well as a prescient critic of a new nation that was struggling to find its own values. One of Emerson's great fears, which is being borne out before our eyes, was that American capitalism would take over our spiritual values and it would drown out who we are as a nation. Emerson was known as the Oracle of Concord, the George Washington of American letters, and he was widely revered in his lifetime. Ralph Waldo Emerson called Emerson his master. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche thought that he was the most gifted of Americans. And this reverence for Emerson has really only grown down through the ages, although he's still not as well known as his protege, Henry David Thoreau. Part of that is because Henry David Thoreau was a very colorful character and he died young. Henry David Thoreau, I think of as the Jim Morrison of American letters. He had this splash, this immediate hit. He was an eccentric, and then he was gone. Whereas Emerson had a more staid, conservative personality, and he lived well into his 70s. So people tend to think of Emerson as this éminence grise, this kind of gray eminence, as opposed to the wild child of American letters.
So is he more like Mick Jagger? And
Right. Emerson was the Jagger and Thoreau is the Jim Morris.
there you go.
So Emerson's best known for his philosophy of self-reliance. And self-reliance is not what people think that it is. When people hear about self-reliance, they think it must be about individualism, sort of isolation. I can do it on my own. But that's not at all what self-reliance was about. For Emerson, self-reliance was far closer to the idea of self-trust. And it was a spiritual practice that was based on the idea that we all have God within us. We have an element of the divine within us. And when we remember that, it helps us to follow the better angels of our own nature. So self reliance is reliance not only on one's own character, but also reliance on God, which Emerson saw as two sides of the same coin, with the divine residing within the individual. And that's why he said, quote, self-reliance, the height and perfection of man is reliance on God. So, contrary to what people think when they hear about self-reliance, that it's some kind of conceit or arrogance or rugged individualism. In fact, self-reliance has to do with spiritual connection and trusting the divine within us. So let me just read you a few of the basic tenets of self-reliance to give you a sense of why Emerson was such a profound and universal philosophical thinker, and also why he had so much to do with the Stoics. Each person creates her own reality. Nothing, except for physical violence, can harm you except with your permission. It's very important stuff. Obstacles can become opportunities. Virtue is the portal to happiness. The God in you connects you to the God in all things. Character is destiny. There is no me without you. In other words, interdependence is everything. Mortality, he believed, is the greatest teacher. Emerson taught that wonder and awe are the keys to the kingdom, that without our higher echelon of emotions, wonder, awe, reverence, celebration, adoration, we lose something essential about our human nature. And finally, that life without self-knowledge is not worth living. For Emerson, the unfolding of our nature is the principal reason for our being alive. So, self-reliance focuses on the inner life as opposed to the external life. And we'll be getting more deeply into this as we move forward in this session. But that's something I'd like you to keep in mind. Keeping the fact that not allowing the outside world to determine the quality of our inner lives is central to both self-reliance and stoicism. Steve, could you just pull up that first card, please? Okay. Next. Next one. Here we go. So as you can see, Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, and Emerson are speaking the same language. Marcus Aurelius, nothing external to you has any power over you. And Ralph Waldo Emerson, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Remember this, realize this, and you will find strength. So this is the same basic principle of Stoic self-awareness and recognizing that it's the power of our thoughts that determine the quality of our lives. It's not external circumstances. And in times like these, this is an enormously important message to remember. It's so easy with the world in so much tumult, with so much drama and fragmentation happening, to imagine that it's not possible to be happy, peaceful, and well in times like these, but that is absolutely not true. As the Stoics taught 2,500 years ago and Emerson taught a couple of hundred years ago, by observing our own thoughts and emotions, we're able to modulate and moderate our responses to external events and choose how we want to be impacted by the things that are happening both outside of us and within us. And that's why Emerson recommended nonconformity. That's a central principle of his philosophy, nonconformity, not allowing ourselves to simply be swept along with the crowd or taking things on faith, taking things simply because society tells us to. As he put it, trust yourself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. Isn't that beautiful? Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. So it's through self-trust that we're able to find our center and maintain a sense of balance in times of great difficulty. Emerson was very clear about the fact that society is not your friend. Right? Of course, we need societies to organize our lives, but society itself is there to part of the social fabric, and creating a social organization is to take away our originality, to mind the kind of status quo, to ignore the impulses in us that may lead to civil disobedience, or following the voice within us that is moving in an opposite direction. So it's very important to remember that originality and nonconformity are essential to self-reliance, and to be vigilant against this tendency to simply go along with the way of the sort of the common run without questioning why we're doing that. Now, Emerson called this quality inside of us that has intelligence, genius. And he used the word genius in the same way that the ancient Romans who created that word used it, to mean a tutelary deity, a presence that each of us is born with, whose purpose is simply to guide us toward our own fruition. So genius doesn't mean having a massive IQ. It doesn't mean accomplishing huge things in the world. Genius simply means listening to the voice within us and following its guidance, particularly when it is moving us in a direction other than what society is telling us to do. So we are all born with a unique genius, and our job is to learn how to listen to it. By focusing as much attention as possible on our inner world and practicing what the Stoics called prosoke and Buddhists call mindfulness, the outer world comes to have less power over us, and we're much better able to stay centered, to remain balanced and sane and happy. So let's move into the four principles. I'm going to give a short talk on these four principles. Then we're going to do a short writing exercise together, and then we're going to have time for conversation and questions. The first principle I'd like to talk about has to do with perception. Can you pull up the card, please? The next card, please, Steve. The one before that? Technical issues. Nope. Here we go. Okay, so Emerson asks, what is life but the angle of vision? A man is measured by the angle at which he looks at objects. So, in other words, he's telling us what the Buddhists tell us, what the Stoics tell us, and in fact, what quantum physicists are telling us, which is that what we call our reality is a subjective experience. Our perspective determines what we believe to be real. Okay, and it also creates what we call ourself. When we break down what we think of as ourselves, it really does come down to a particular point of view. What it is that defines you is your way of seeing, your way of looking at the world. Your identity is inescapably connected to how you see and what you believe to be real. We create stories out of our experience, as all of us know. And the stories we create determine what we believe our lives to be. But the story is not the truth. The story is not reality. Story is our interpretation of reality. As I like to say to my students, my writing to awaken students, you're the storyteller, not the story. And it's when we confuse ourselves with our own fictions and we identify too strongly with our version of things that our worlds narrow down and we forget that we are creating reality in every moment. Right now, I don't know how many folks are on this call. Let's say 50 folks are on this call. We're all in 50 different movies, depending on how we slept, what we had for dinner, whether we like this topic, etc., etc. So understanding that we're creating our own stories is an essential part of Stoic philosophy and Ralph Waldo Emerson's philosophy. There's nothing wrong with story. We're born to create stories. Stories are how we navigate this mysterious world. That's not a problem. The problem is that we forget that they are stories. We forget that we're creating fictions, and then we get all mixed up and believe that what we say is true is actually the empirical fact of what's going on, and that's simply not the truth. I love what Emerson says about this. He says, people do not seem to realize that their opinion of the world is also a confession of their character. So how we see the world says more about us than it does about the things and the people that we're commenting on. So ask yourself, how do you see? What is your particular angle of vision? Are you someone who tends to be optimistic or pessimistic? Are you Pollyanna and look at the world through rose-colored glasses, or do you tend to see as through a glass darkly? It's very important to understand our own perspective so that we can separate out what is bias and what is fact, right? What is belief and what is the truth of what's going on around us. So ask yourself, how do you see? What is your angle of vision? And are you able to maintain your own clarity when you're barraged with information from the outside world, which is part of our dilemma these days? is that we are so overwhelmed with information 24/7. The news swamps our lives as well as social media to a point where we can't hear ourselves think anymore. We can't separate our own perspective from the perspective that we're given by the media and by other people. So perspective, angle of vision is the first principle that we want to keep in mind when it comes to self-reliance and developing stronger core in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of a lot of outside stimulus coming our way. The next principle is that everything is double. Everything in life is double and paradoxical. We are two-sided, contradictory beings with multiple levels and mismatched parts, as everybody knows. What the mind wants, the body may reject. What the spirit longs for, the loins may have no interest in. Right? We are many-sided beings with lots of different contradictory parts, and that is not a problem. As long as we allow for our own contradictions, as long as we make enough space within our self-image and our sense of who we are for this doubleness to exist. On any given day, we're stingy and generous. We're brave and cowardly. We're expansive and we contract. We want to be connected to other people and we want to be on our own. Right? We're homo duplex. We are the two-sided ape. And understanding that is essential to self-knowledge and wisdom. As Emerson put it, there is a crack in everything God has made. There is a crack in everything God has made. Of course, that reminds you of the Leonard Cohen line about there's a crack in everything, and that's what lets light get in. Yeah. So understanding that our strengths grow out of our weaknesses, that every quality or trait we possess contains its opposite, deepens our understanding of who we are and also helps us appreciate our own limitations, our own flaws, our own imperfections. We come to understand that the things in us that we wish weren't there are often the source of our deepest wisdom and our deepest growth. There's a profound relationship between the wound and the gift. If you look at your own life, you'll probably see that there are ways that what it is that makes you original, the things that give you passion, the source of your creativity, is often connected to your yearning, connected to the place where you may feel split, fragmented, or lost, connected to the part of yourself that felt you needed to redeem as a child. These qualities, which are often based in pain and discomfort and loss, can frequently lead to our deep creativity and discovering our own genius. Can we please have the next card, Steve? Here we go. No man ever had a point of pride that was not injurious to him, so no man ever had a defect that was not somewhere useful to him. So it's really understanding the paradoxical nature of things, that everything is at least two-sided. And that when you understand that, when you appreciate that, it brings the conflict inside us if not to a stop, at least to a pause. We're no longer quite as judgmental about ourselves. Instead of just putting ourselves down for things that we perceive to be weaknesses or flaws, we become curious about them instead and inquire into our own cracks and our own flaws to see what they may be hiding. What can they teach us, right? Self-reliance means opening to the totality of who we are, including these contradictions and including our own doubleness. Enlightenment comes from shedding light on everything, not just the things that we approve of or the things that we're proud of, but the entirety of our psyche and our awareness. As Carl Jung put it, we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So this path of self-reliance requires us to look into all parts of who we are, including the psychological shadow. Emerson, as well as the Stoics, put enormous store behind knowing ourselves in the round. right? We don't want to simply look at the externals of who we are. We want to understand ourselves in the round. And that's why journaling can be so very useful on the path of insight and self-reliance. Emerson himself was a lifelong journaler. The first question that he asked Henry David Thoreau when Thoreau came to him as a young writer was, "Do you keep a journal?" We want to be able to have a place where we reflect on our experience, where we can put down our truthful thoughts and feelings. This is an essential part of any practice of self awareness. And that's why Steve and Wisdom Feed and I have put together this Emerson journal that we're going to tell you about later in this session. So, exploring ourselves, investigating how the difficult parts of our character are potentially aspects of our strength, turns the obstacle upside down. It turns our perceived imperfections, our weaknesses, and the things that we were ashamed of on their head. And we realize that they can actually have potential that we may not have been aware of. As Emerson's protege, Walt Whitman, put it famously, "Do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. I am vast. I contain multitudes." So understand that we contain multitudes, that we have many different characters inside of us, lots of different voices, lots of different tendencies and possibilities, is extremely healing and brings a kind of an integrity to our lives. Right? We understand integrity meaning wholeness. Right? We bring the fragments of ourselves together in awareness, and we accept that we indeed have confusing parts. We have dark parts. We have light parts. We have parts that we're proud of, and we have parts that we're ashamed of. Big surprise, right? There's nothing wrong with that as long as we allow that that is the truth. By allowing ourselves our complexity and appreciating paradox, it releases us from black and white polarizing thinking and moves us toward a more dialectical both and approach. And can't we use that in the world today? If there's one thing that's missing in these polarizing times is an understanding of the dialectical nature, the paradoxical nature, that I contain aspects of you, you contain aspects of me, that it isn't black or white, either or. And it's that kind of harsh divisiveness that creates so much violence and so much illusion in the world. So when it comes to the path of self-knowledge, there's kind of an expansion to allow the conflicting parts of ourselves equal time is absolutely critical. So ask yourself, how are you when it comes to your own contradictions? Do you refuse to accept the fact that you are both good and potentially bad? Do you allow yourself to be this hybrid creature? Or do you try to oversimplify yourself, dumb yourself down, or shrink to fit? This is very important stuff. So much of our struggle and so much of our suffering and so much of our ignorance comes from trying to cut ourselves in half and deny the things that confuse us or threaten us. So we want to open. We want to open to the totality of who we are. The next principle I'd like to talk to you about has to do with nature being our greatest teacher. And this is something that Emerson shares profoundly with the Stoics. The vital importance of staying connected to the natural order of things. As Emerson put it, a stream of power flows through you. And it's this stream, this power comes from nature here, as he's written. In the presence of nature, a wild delight, move this so I can read it. A wild delight runs through the man in spite of real sorrows. Nature says, he is my creature, and Maugre, in spite of all his impertinent griefs, he shall be glad with me. Isn't that beautiful? In the presence of nature, a wild delight runs through man in spite of real sorrows. And this is something that we tend to forget in our over-industrialized, mostly urban lives. We forget, and it's because we forget this connection to nature that we suffer. We overlook the wisdom lessons that nature can teach us when we slow down, when we look deeply, when we reflect, and we allow ourselves to be taught. In times like these, this connection to nature is particularly crucial because we get lost so much in our heads and we forget the primal connection that we share with all living things. The noise of the world tends to drown out our peace and separates us from our inner wisdom, from our genius, from the whisper only you can hear, as Emerson put it. Listen to the whisper only you can hear. We can't possibly hear that whisper when we're constantly bombarded with external input. So we need to get away. We need to protect our solitude. We need to find refuges in our life where we can settle down, and nature is one of those primary refuges. As Emerson put it, quote, "In the woods we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity which nature cannot repair." Isn't that beautiful? Let me repeat that. In the woods we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity which nature cannot repair. Most of you know that experience of being in nature and feeling that sense of repair, feeling that sense of coming home to ourselves, grounding ourselves in the earth, remembering the indivisibility and the unity of all things. That's where we learn it, is in the midst of nature, in the midst of non-man-made things. In our over-civilized lives, we also tend to lose touch with our own wildness, our own freedom. And this is something that Emerson was so intent upon, was maintaining a sense of wildness, not becoming overly domesticated in our lives. And when we lose that wildness, it's very easy to fall into malaise, to fall into depression. When we lose connection with our wildness, we lose our vitality, right? And we also, of course, miss the lessons that nature is trying to teach us. Emerson talks about observing the industry of ants, the patience of trees, the flow of rivers, and embodying these kinds of qualities into our lives, things that we learn directly from the observation of and reflection upon nature. So ask yourself, what can you learn from nature? What is your relationship like with nature today? Do you spend enough time in the non-man-made world? Do you feel connected to the natural order of things, including the fact that everything changes? Because, of course, that's one of the primary lessons that we learn from nature is the lesson of impermanence and ultimately mortality. Observing how things fall away in nature helps to make us more comfortable with our own falling away, our own diminishment over time, and our own mortality. And the final principle I'd like to talk to you about this evening is Emerson's belief that the proper emotion is wonder. The proper emotion is wonder. He believed that it is in our higher emotions, wonder, awe, reverence, adoration, celebration, ecstasy, faith, devotion, joy, this echelon of emotions, that we experience the divinity within ourselves. As he put it, all our life is a miracle. Ourselves are the greatest wonder of all. I can believe a miracle because I can raise my own arm. I can believe a miracle because I can remember. I can believe it because I can speak and be understood by you. I can believe in a manifestation of power beyond my own because I am such a manifestation. There is not a minute in the 24 hours that is not filled with miracles. Isn't that beautiful? There's not a minute in the 24 hours that is not filled with miracles. And when we forget this elevated dimension of our lives, it's so easy to feel flattened by the harsh, violent world around us. One of the downsides of living in a secular society, a desacralized society like ours, is that we tend to become flattened. We tend to become narrow. We tend to become shallow, forgetting the miraculousness of the world that we live in. And this was an intimate part of the transcendentalist movement that Emerson was a big part of. Transcendentalism came out of the feeling in the mid 19th century that people were losing a vital, alive spirituality. They felt that by going to church and being religious, they weren't actually connecting or having a direct experience of God or divinity or spirit, however you like to think about it. And so the Transcendentalists came along to say, you don't need an intermediary to connect with the divine. Emerson famously, at his famous divinity school address at Harvard, he was asked to give a lecture, and he came in and told these young students, these 15-year-old boys at the Harvard Divinity School, to throw out their books, to forget about book learning, forget about religion, and go out in the woods by themselves. And that's if they really wanted to connect with God, that's what they would do. Needless to say, Harvard was not happy with this message and exiled Emerson from the Harvard campus for 30 years. He wasn't allowed to come back on the Harvard campus after giving his famous and controversial divinity school address. So, by understanding that we have that there's the potential for an immediate connection to God, we align with the transcendentalist idea, which is a mystic idea, that we are unified with all the things around us, and that God is this force of intelligence that exists within us. Emerson teaches that without remembering that the proper emotion is wonder, we lose our spiritual aspiration, we lose our cosmic aptitudes, and life itself, our existence, loses its luster. He believed that lusters, as he called them, Lustre, that lusters were the most precious parts of our lives. Those moments of epiphany and illumination that elevate our consciousness and raise us above the mundane. So think about your own life. Think about those moments when you were aware of something mysterious in the world, when you felt connected to everything around you, when the separation between you and the other seemed to fall away. Those kinds of experiences, those lusters, for Emerson, were the signposts on the pilgrim's path. Those were the proofs of our own awakening to who we truly are and what's actually possible when we look to nature, when we remember the God within, and when we open to the possibility beyond what the mind tells us is real. The mind, of course, is a calculator, a precious organ that does obviously great good, but also limits our perception. So Emerson is always telling us to move toward the heart and to integrate heart and mind so that we don't forget this magical and extraordinary dimension of life. He was so afraid, even then in the mid 19th century, he was so afraid that America would lose its way. It would lose its transcendental soul and its purpose. What it is that sets this ideally sets this country apart is this aspiration of the individual toward a higher vision of the self, which is so unique. He said, quote, "It is the vulgarity of this country to believe that naked wealth, unrelieved by any use or design, is merit." And when you read those words, which were written in 1840, you can't help but think about golden escalators and this idea that the richest is the best, and that power is our primary value, our primary concern. Right? You think back to Emerson saying it is the vulgarity of this country to believe that naked wealth, unrelieved by any use or design, is merit. And you realize that this man truly was a prophet, and that we are moving precisely in the direction that he warned against. So that's what I wanted to say to you about these 4 basic principles. And now I'd love to do just a brief 10-minute writing exercise together. So, Steve, could you just pull up that last card, or the penultimate card? Here we go. I'd like you, please, now, if you wouldn't mind, to just take 10 minutes to write about how in your life today you would like to be more self-reliant, right? In light of what I've just been talking about, changing perspective, connecting to wonder, connecting to nature, how would you like to be more self-reliant in your life today? And how might this impact your happiness? We're just going to take 10 minutes to do that, please. I'll give you a deepening prompt 5 minutes in, and then we'll come back together as a group. 10 minutes, please. Five more minutes, please. Do you allow yourself to be overly influenced by the outside world? And if so, why? 5 more minutes. One more minute, please. Let's start to finish up, please. And let's come back together as a group. Steve, we can pull that card now. There we go. Hey, welcome back. So I'll be interested to know how this went for you. Were you able to identify ways and places in your life that you would like to be more self-reliant? Why does this matter? How would this self-reliance impact your well-being and your happiness? The wonderful thing about Emerson's philosophy is that it is eminently practical, and that's what he has in common with the Stoics. Stoicism was invented as a way of helping us to deal with negative emotions and the self-destructive tendencies of the mind. And by using these principles, particularly in times like these, we can remain our own authority. We can maintain our own center despite being buffeted and assaulted with so much pain and destruction all around us. It doesn't mean that we have to fall apart ourselves. And this is the great insight that Emerson had. It's the great insight that Marcus Aurelius had 2,500 years ago. When he wrote his Meditations, the Antonine Plague was sweeping through the Roman Empire. It killed a third of the citizenry of the Roman Empire. And in the midst of that, he wrote his famous Meditations on how nothing outside can hurt us except with our permission. So if Marcus Aurelius could do it and Emerson could do it in the midst of the Civil War, we have the possibility of applying these same philosophical principles to the challenges that we're facing today. So it's been great to talk about Emerson with you, and now I'll turn it over to Steve Stein.
Okay. Um, so first of all, Mark, that was great. I have questions, and we'll have some Q&A in just a minute. But just kind of a word from our sponsor. This is the kind of begin free introductory class to a 3-week course that starts the next 3 Wednesdays. And I put a link uh, to sign up. I put a link in the chat. And also, we have this project that we've been working on. It's a course that we recorded in the studio that'll be out in a month or so. And but we did this journal, and I'm going to share a screen of it. Uh, it's it's pretty special. Let me see if I could find it here. Here, here's a cover of it, and it's uh, it's excellent. It coincides with the course, but it also stands alone by itself. And literally just sent it off to the printer today, so we'll have our proof copies in a couple of days. But I just wanted to make a special offer that so this will retail for 17 bucks and $5 shipping. But if you sign up for the course tonight, we'll send this to you in the mail. It's 100 page. It has QR codes that go to some beautiful highlights of the course. So just to share that, and I'm feeling so immersed in Emerson now between this and preparing and doing the book and Stoicism. And so anyway, just to say that if you order by midnight tonight, if you sign up, we'll send you this like a $22 value. And it might take a month because it's so new, but we'll absolutely give that to you as a bonus if you sign up. It's a really cool book. I can't wait to hold it in my hands. But uh, anyway, uh, that's my spiel.
You got your spiel, great. So I'd love to hear from you folks. Does anyone have any questions, comments, anything that occurred to you when talking about Emerson this evening? Anything that you'd like to know or share? Perhaps we have a quiet group.
I have a question to get it kind of started off.
Sure.
So while I was doing that exercise, um, uh, it was interesting and helpful. But then I said to myself something I've never said to. I talk to myself much too much. I'm a New Yorker, it's bad. But uh, I need to be more stoic. And, rather than like running around stoic, being more like, a magnet. But in my mind, I would never aspire to be more stoic because not in the Emersonian, stoic is removed. And in my mind, that's,
Yeah.
New York, oh, he's stoic, he's removed. But stoic means poised also. So is that both?
It means poised, but it doesn't mean repressed. And that's the connotation that Stoicism has. When you call someone a Stoic, it means they're in total control of their emotions. They're a little bit repressed. Everything is kind of tamped down. That's not what the ancient Stoics were about at all. The ancient Stoics were passionate people. They were deeply engaged in the world around them, but they understood that the mind is not necessarily our friend and that we need tools for working with the crazy mind, the mind that turns us against ourselves. And that gives the outside world power over us. That really is the essential point. And it's the reason that I wanted to do this now, Steve, because the world is, we're in such dire straits. And I have never, I'm almost 70, and I've never seen the people in my life so distressed about what's going on in the world and seen such a widespread sense of helplessness and confusion and overwhelm. And that's what Stoicism can help us to deal with recognize what's going on. It's not about being in denial or being ostriches in the world, but it's understanding that how we respond to the outside world is within our power. Viktor Frankl, the famous Holocaust survivor and author of Man's Search for Meaning, said that that is the last of the human freedoms, the ability to choose our responses to the circumstances we find ourselves in. That's the only freedom that we have. So when you can't change the outside world, you can absolutely change how you respond to it. And what your beliefs are about it, and how much you allow the outside world to tell you who you are and what's possible in the world. That's what we want to overcome and really reclaim our own power. That's what this is about.
Yeah, if anyone, you could raise your hand or just unmute yourself and and okay,
Hi,
Nargis.
Nargis. I see Nargis's hand.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Steve. Hi, everyone. Mark, I wanted to tell you, like, the second principle, everything is double. So when I read your book, Lessons from an American Stoic, that was just I had a little bit like introduction to this concept, but then when I read it and reread your book, I just love this because then I noticed how much other people want to be one thing.
Yeah.
And I just want to tell them it's okay. You're okay. You don't have to just pretend to be this, this way. So it's so hard for them to want to accept it. It's so many people, it's so hard for them to want to accept all those paradoxes inside ourselves. I know
Yes.
how hard it is to accept that.
Yeah, but well, we're raised in a dualistic culture. It's either or, it's good or bad. And how much of our lives do we devote to trying to be good? And whatever doesn't fit in with that picture of what good is, we reject or we put into the shadow. And the problem is that so much of our creativity, our joy, our passion is connected to qualities that may not be considered good by society, but are actually very life-giving and important to self-actualization. Stanley Kunitz said, "What makes the engine go? Desire, desire, desire. If we're not connected to our desires, we lose our vitality." And so the problem, so if you start cutting off everything that gives you vitality, that gives you joy because it doesn't meet the approval of other people, your life shrinks. You become a husk. You become a kind of an empty shell of what's possible. And so many of the people I work with talk about this. They find themselves in middle age. They say, "I've done everything I was supposed to do. I've been a law-abiding citizen. Where's my joy? What happened to my passion? What happened to my joie de vivre?" And often the problem is that they've been trying to jump through other people's hoops and trying to meet other people's expectations and forgetting what is actually true for them. So you're right. You're absolutely right, Nargis. We try to be so monolithic, one thing or the other. And the fact is, we're a whole symphony, right? We contain multitudes within us. And I find that enormously liberating.
That is so true. My daughter, she dragged us to a fundraiser for a church. It was so interesting. I was sitting next to a woman. She was about 65 years old, and she was so Christian. And then it's so interesting. I was just like bringing up this concept. And then I noticed that I just blurted out and I told her, "How could you say that? I told her, I said, "You have like millions of contradictions." It was so funny. So this woman who was married for 45 years and she had 3 sons and she actually had MS. So I felt a little bit bad. She was like, "I don't know you, but I do not." I was like, "Oh my God." And then later I had to ask my daughter, "Can you please apologize to her?" When I said that, I'm just saying that I'm discovering my own contradictions. I didn't want to attack her. Can you just apologize to her? So we ended up having a lunch, a few months later, and it was okay, but it was just so funny. I was like, "But you have like billions of contradictions." She was like, but anyways, Mark, thank you so much. It was
You're welcome. Yeah, it's better to talk about your own contradictions than tell someone else that they have.
I had to tell my daughter, tell her that I am studying my own contradictions. My mom didn't want to attack you. I'm so sorry. So,
thanks a lot, Nargis.
Thank you, Mark.
Hey, Martha, I see your hand.
Hi, everyone. Mark and Steve and everyone. I just loved this. I was making a beautiful fish chowder while I was listening. And it was like listening to you and listening to Emerson was like mother's milk to my soul. It was like taking a bath in the truth that I love and the way that this world is completely insane as far as I'm concerned. And yet there are miracles every day that I experience. But it's all about Mother Nature for me. I would have gotten an A+ in Emerson's class, I'm sure, because that's it. I'm in New York right now. I spent the summer camping in my van, mostly in Rhode Island and on the Cape, and just being close, sleeping on the ground, sleeping close to nature, swimming in the ocean every day, connecting. It's all about that. And if I don't have that, I become ill. I become physically ill. I become depressed. I become anxious. And connection is so important on all levels. Connection. I'm not a hermit by any stretch. I'm a people person, but I'm a people person who had to isolate because of childhood trauma. So the repairing and the reconnecting that takes place in Mother Nature is my foundation. And then the connection with people is also very important, but it's being connected myself, being anchored, like with all of this madness for ultra-sensitive people. My only solution is to stay anchored in love like an oak tree. I keep coming back to that, like an oak tree.
Beautiful.
And just to remember what's true and what's real and what isn't. And for me, only love is real. And I heard Richard Rohr say that he said, if you want to know God, he quoted Romans actually, if you want to know God, look to his creation. Well, Mother Earth, hello. So that's how I get to know God. So this was right up my alley, and I thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Martha. I'm glad. Enjoy your chowder.
Thank you. It turned out really beautifully. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Anyone else have any comments, questions? Anything you'd like to share before we close?
Can you tell us a little bit about what we're going to cover in the class in the next 3 weeks?
Yes, we're going to be going more in depth with Emerson's thoughts on originality and nonconformity. We're going to talk about nature and what he believed about nature's intelligence and how the intelligence of nature connects us to the divine within ourselves. We're going to be looking at awe and how it is that awe changes the brain. Emerson understood this before neuroscience. Emerson was talking about how awe actually shifts our relationship to the world. It shifts how we understand ourselves and what we believe to be true. And we're also going to be looking at fear and courage. It feels very important these days to talk about what courage actually means. We have a lot of twisted ideas about courage, a lot of kind of grandiose, heroic ideas about courage. But in fact, courage is a humble act. Courage is simply the willingness to take the next step into the unknown. And so we'll be looking at Emerson's teachings on courage, strength, and fear, and the importance of coming up close and personal with our own fears, and that's how they lose their power over us. That's kind of a quick overview, Steve.
Nice. Okay, well, I think that was just an excellent kind of introduction to all this. And yeah, so hopefully you can make it next week. And also, I wanted to say that if you miss one of the classes, you get the recording of it a day or two after. So you don't have to stress if you can't make all 3 weeks, or if you can't make any of the weeks, you get lifetime access to the recordings. And yeah, so
And just so you know, folks, I'm going to be talking also about journaling, and we're going to be doing 2 guided writing practices in each session that are going to be targeted to the theme that we're exploring. And I'll talk more about how you use writing as a path of self-inquiry. Ola Karen is asking, each class is 90 minutes. 90 minutes. So we hope to see you there. And until then, Steve, thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much, and hope to see you next week, or if not, see you next time. All right, that was great, Mark. That was really, really excellent. All right, I'm going to sign us off, and
My pleasure.
hopefully we see you next week.
Have a good evening. Bye,
Thank
everybody.
Have a
you.
good one.
That's wonderful.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.